Professor Prasad Kaipa will be giving a special address, sharing his experience and guiding the youngsters how they can proceed uh, on the lines that he has taken in his successful career using Hinduism based psychology with a shloka. Thank you, sir. Welcome, Professor Prasad Kaipa. Please start your talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nagaraj Garu, and Sarvebhyo Namaha. I thought I should start really with looking at, let's see, the Hinduism and modern psychology. I would like to start with a certain way to frame it for the today's conversation. So obviously, as Nagaraj ji has mentioned, I will talk more about the application of it and how I was able to do. To set a context, obviously the Hinduism is the practice of Sanatana Dharma in the religious context, religious framework. Because when Sanatana Dharma was there, when Hinduism was dominant as Sanatana Dharma, there were very few other religions. So it was not called a religion. But now that we have multiple religions, the Hindu philosophy that came from Vedas and Upanishads and Darshana Shastras and Vedangas and all of them have created a unique focus, and that now we deal with as the Hindu religion. And I was really looking at what is the mindset of the Hindu context. What is the underlying most important concepts that differentiate Hinduism even from other dharmic religions like Jainism or Buddhism? If you were to look at it, from my perspective, Purnatvam and the Ananda, these are the two unique concepts, I believe, are the ones that differentiate, because it is like removing the suffering. If Buddhism focuses on, here it is about Brahmanandam, like Satyam Gnanam Anantam Brahma, we say in Taittiriya Upanishad. Of course, sometimes people also say Satyam Gnanam Anandam Brahma, because Anantam Anandam seem to be in many respects equivalent. And of course, any stotram, any puja, any Veda, anything which we start with certain Shanti mantras, one of them is Purnamadam Purnamidah. All of you know about this, so I won't specifically touch upon it. So that is one of the extraordinarily important. And what it means as an implication for application is Purnatvam and Ananda do not talk about illness or just talk about a specific context for the disease, or whether it is a psychological disease or physiological disease. It talks more about wellness. That's why we talk about the medicine, the Charaka Samhita, and some of them have got many chapters on the Manovyadis and the psychological implications, but they talk about Ayurveda, the wellness. It is focused on how you can increase the health and the wholeness rather than reducing the illness. The second extremely important part which I want to touch upon is that irrespective of whether we believe in Advaita, Visishtadvaita, Dvaita, whichever philosophies we look at, in some much more explicitly, in some there is a certain Advaita concept that we bring in. The dualities are acknowledged as the two sides of the same coin or the same whole. So male, female, external, internal, light, shadow, I and the world, God and human being, all of them are two sides of the same coin. And this is an extraordinarily important part, because in Abrahamic religions, sometimes when we look at, and I will tell you why these are important concepts in a minute, but in there, the God and the demon actually do not share the same space. Whereas for us, the Trinity, Hindu Trinity, the creation as well as destruction are the two sides of the same coin. Why is that? Because when there is a schism, when there is a separation between one part and the second part, number one, there is no wholeness. Number two, it creates trauma. So, for example, between the body and the mind, if there is a schism, generally it shows up first on the physiological domain. If there is an issue between the ego and the mind, let us say my father does not treat me very well, but my ego says I am much better than how my father says something to me. That might lead to anxiety or depression, or that might lead to certain psychological disorders. Whereas between the spirit and the ego, if there were to be certain kinds of difficulties and certain kinds of disagreements, then it leads to narcissistic behavior. For example, Genghis Khan's and if you look at Hitler's and some of them, while they may have extraordinary intelligence in certain areas and certain capabilities, because of their ego-driven, their inability to acknowledge and appreciate something larger than ego actually results in all kinds of problems. Of course, that can impact the society in that respect as well. So now let's look at the Western paradigm for that matter. If we think about the Western paradigm, obviously the psyche and the soma connection which we look at, they are much more objective is the number one perspective. Number two, the lack of illness is considered to be normal. Of course, I'm not talking about the WHO definition of mental health and physical health at this moment, but lack of illness itself is considered to be a normal person. The question of extraordinary, from normal to great, is not necessarily considered. Only in the recent times, the coaching seems to address from functional or normal human being to reaching effective and extraordinary performance. We call that, we do coaching, even though that has got a psychological roots. Whereas going from dysfunctional to functional, dysfunctional to normal, we do therapy. So to a certain extent, psychology, you might call it, one is about illness to normalcy, normalcy to wellness. There seems to be two kinds of different parts. And recently, it has become much more easier to deal with some of them, because most of the psychology before the MRI and fMRI and some of the non-invasive techniques, we could only study the brain when a person has got some kind of a trauma, some kind of a tumor. And when we open up the brain, we could really look at what kind of disorders are there in their brain. Otherwise, we just were making assumptions based on certain kind of theories. The second thing is, while people talk about values, beliefs, society one lives in, and the expectations of other people, and the context like the COVID that we are living in, how well are those addressed in the modern psychology? Some seem to be like Gestalt therapy. Some of the things seem to take advantage of it and talk about it. Some don't. Primarily, the modern psychology seems to have become much more objective and much more quantitative these days. So, for example, even if I go to a therapy, my therapy asks me to fill out a questionnaire right up front, and then he looks at where I am, and then he tries to take what specifically are the situations, and then they try to say, oh, from 0 to 10, this is where you are. Just like physiologically, people used to measure pain from 0 to 10. Now they talk about certain characteristics which are considered to be behavioral in situation. But there is no holistic connection from between the care provider and the patient. And the mental health issues are much more pronounced, and they are all majority of the times prescriptive rather than relationship oriented. So these days in the West, we talk to a psychiatrist rather than much more than a regular therapist. And only in recent time periods, the appreciative inquiries, mindfulness, positive psychology, thanks to some of the connections with the Mormon philosophy, and like a Kim Cameron and some of the other people who have really brought in some of the Mormon philosophy, it has become much more positive psychology. Otherwise, clinical psychology was not necessarily in the same context. This is the latest document that I got from World Economic Forum about the mental health. If you really look at the mental health, so look at the various connections they have made. They talk about genomics and mental health and machine learning, continuous monitoring, customization of mental health, open science, destigmatizing mental health, poor mental health as NCD, mental health in the workplace. I wonder, where is the patient himself or herself actually coming in? What is the role of a patient looking at the first person research? How am I feeling? What are the subjective type of stuff is something that are not paid sufficient attention even in the research that is happening. So with this context, I want to give you some examples of how in past 35 years, I have been able to put some of my focus and my interest in Indian wisdom and the Hindu, especially the Hindu wisdom from the Upanishads and Gita and the Yoga Vasistha and Patanjali Yoga Sutras and some of these into applications. Today, even though my work quite a bit has got organizational context and advising the CEOs, I'm going to limit myself to focus on the personal psychology. So that means coaching, that means working with people, and coaching and helping them to become more effective, more interested. And in that context, so there are, first, these are the 5 things. I don't know how much time I'll have to be able to cover all of them. I'll try to go as quickly as possible. And if there, obviously this is not time for me to give you elaborate answers. So I will, you can touch upon some of those, or you can look at some of the videos or writings. Each of them are covered. So the first one, let me start with a personal awakening. When I came to United States and when I was working for Apple Computer as a research fellow, I was actually trying to fit in at that time into American culture. While I was proud of my Hindu heritage and I was really proud of my stuff, and actually because I was in Salt Lake City, many Mormon priests and Mormon preachers who used to come to my house were getting really frustrated. Some of them went and they told, it seems later, that please don't go to Prasad Kaipa's house, because instead of he converting to Mormonism, he will try to convert you to Hinduism. But I was actually having a nice conversations with them. But when I was in Apple, because we were supposed to design tools and various kinds of computer technologies, we were really looking at brain research at that time. But 30 years ago, there was no MRI and no such non-invasive techniques. So I had to go talk to a variety of Nobel Prize winners, variety of experts in psychology, in education, in brain research, and all of them. And one of the great psychologists who was working with the Down syndrome and people on the spectrum, and people, certain amount of work he had done with bipolar and ADHD and all of them. There was a guy, and he was applying it in the educational context, called Reuven Feuerstein. He was in Israel. He was doing something called a mediated learning experience. And I had a chance to study with him for several days. And after about a week of staying in his home and studying some of this, he gave me one sutra, and then which talked about Rishi, Devata, Chandas and their interconnections, and a couple of Yoga Sutras. And he told me, do you know these things? I said, yeah, I have by-hearted at one time 192 Yoga Sutras and 700 Gita. I mean, I was really arrogant at that time. Of course, that is part of Apple culture also, but I think my personality itself, I was much more Rajasic. He looked at it and said, okay, now if you know this and if you understand what this talks about, the interconnection between Rishi, Devata, Chandas and some of them, then you have understood my work. I teach 50,000 people based on these principles. I said, not so fast. Well, I might know what the principles are. I might be able to quote them to you, but I don't understand how you are applying it in the study of Down syndrome and people on the spectrum and everything else. Then he said, you have the knowledge. Unfortunately, you are not applying your own knowledge. You are just going around spending more time with the brain researchers and all these people, ignoring your own wisdom in the Indian context. That kind of woke me up, because he basically said mediated learning means you need to know which devata are you praying, which kind of way in which you need to pray, what you might call what kind of things you use. You may use Bilvapatra for somebody and you may use Modakas for somebody else. So if you don't have the grammar, if you don't have the Vyakaranam, how to connect with them, the Chandas, if you don't have, and if you don't understand which god needs which kinds of pujas and which Rishi had created Gayatri, which created somebody else, if you don't know, then you can't actually do a good job. Similarly, with the patient, with the people who are in there, you need to really apply personalized medicine, and with their family, who they are, what it is, you need to mediate how they are experiencing the situation, and you need to work with them so that they can understand the context and other people very well. And if you can increase their intelligence in mediating their circumstances, their intelligence can exponentially increase. But for you, you need to really look at both the situations very well. And that is the fundamental way of thinking about the mediated learning that MLE had really turned around. And actually, right after that, similar situation happened for me in with an accelerated learning expert called Lazano. And then I went to India, and from then onwards, I spent a large amount of time reconnecting myself with both Upanishads and yoga and all of them, and trying to think from a practical perspective. So let me give you some of the practical things which I took it from there. So this is a pyramid. I began to create three-dimensional objects, and my colleague Tom Miles had done his PhD in the Saybrook University, and that's the reason why I'm taking his work, his doctoral dissertation work, for this particular talk as an example. Here, he created something which he called it as a what you call normal pyramid, to really look at how a person is. As you can see, this is very similar to Sri Chakra, which we talk about. Essentially, I took this from a Sri Chakra principles, and I will not have time to talk about it, but basically looking at that Prakriti, how do you really manifest, how do you really begin to look at various scenarios. I applied it, and for a practical purpose, you can say this is a systems model involving multiple elements that make our life work. What are the major elements that make our life work will become 4 cornerstones, and then their interconnectedness and their interactivity is represented by the edges. And there are certain scenarios, if certain, what you might call a cornerstones are missing or present or not, they will be talked about. How we manage our life, I'll give it this as an example. So in this particular case, if you look at it, let us say I am a human being, I have some new challenges because of COVID, because people are asking other people to come back to school this week or work this week. So I have some major challenges. And those challenges, like some people who have vaccination and some people don't have vaccination type of stuff, they have what you call challenges. Have they been vaccinated? Have they not been vaccinated? And so you can actually take this in terms of, is that a challenge you choose to take, or is that a challenge that makes sense to you, that create meaning for you? If the challenge has got connection to your meaning and into your values, then you can actually choose that and then take it forward. That means the meaning is the mediating experience between values and challenges. Otherwise, like some people say, I don't want to take vaccine because it doesn't fit in with my value system for whatever reason. On the other hand, if vaccine is not what you want to have, do you have other resources that will address this particular set of challenges to your satisfaction? That means between the resources and challenges, it is about how satisfied are you with the solution that you have come up with to address the challenge that you have. Then comes the next step you need to look at as the safety. If you are taking that particular approach, whether you take vitamin D or whether you take Ayurvedic medicine, whether you take something else, does that reduce the risk? And does that provide you safety from the COVID vaccine? Or sorry, not vaccine, COVID related diseases. Does that give you enough protection? So that means challenges present three kinds of opportunities. It helps us to clarify the meaning of values. It gives you satisfaction or lack of satisfaction with the resources that we have. Third, amount of risk that we want to take and the protection that we want to have. And finally, between the safety and values, we need to really get certain identity. Here in the United States, you can talk about Republican identity, Democratic identity, or a Trump follower identity, whatever that you talk about, that literally means that everything you address, whether it is resources or challenges, you operate from that particular identity. And finally, the resources that you have, do they, between the values and resources, do you have the quality of resources that you need to take care of you and your family is something that we need to think about. And do you have them in enough amount of quantity if multiple people fall sick? Now, so for example, let us say there are no challenges. I have safety, I have resources, I have values. What happens? I am apathetic. I don't care what other people are going through. I don't really bug anything. But if I suddenly see a relative of mine who got something wonderful, so then I get connected and I will take their challenge as mine. So apathy turns into connection. Let us say, for example, safety is missing. If safety is missing, then I will obviously have anxiety. There is a generic anxiety which will start having, because I don't know when I will get, whether there is a new variant, whether it's a Delta variant or whether it's a Lambda variant. Suddenly I have anxiety because I have no control of other people. I have no control of whom I come across when I go out. Either I may not go out, or I may go out with extraordinary care, because ultimately what I need if I don't have safety is a sense of control. Now, instead of this, if you have no resources, let us say I am poor, I am struggling, then what happens? I become very frustrated. I get frustrated on government, I get frustrated about doctors, I get frustrated about my family not having money, not having resources. That becomes a major issue. Only when somebody provides those resources for me, I make progress to a next dimension. Let us say there are no values. Let us think about some politicians somewhere. If you don't have that, then if there are no values, I get depressed. I'm really depressed that other people don't believe in my set of values. And only time I find joy in work or joy in life is that I'm working with other people who share my experience and the values. That is the only time I will find the joy that is in there. In other words, this is a very complex and a dynamic system. The interactions between various things are continually changing. So this represents a Purnatvam, as well as this is focusing on what it means to be a normal human being who is connected with other people, who have control of situation that's going on in their life. They have some joy in work and life, and they are making progress towards whatever goals and challenges that they have. If they don't have that, then they will slowly, start having different kinds of things, like anxiety becomes too much, or, then the meaning gets lost. And only when they address the safety issues, slowly safety comes in and they will become 50% normal. because they have a little bit of protection left, and slowly over a period of time, the mind management brings it into balance. This is what we call samatvam, or the equanimity that we can bring in. So this is a framework that allows people to really look at, and there is an incredible amount of technology. Technology means it's process. We have built like 130 different kinds of chakras, three-dimensional pyramids like that for different purposes. So this is one way we have developed the chakra concept into management of mind and created a certain PhD dissertation on this particular topic. The second example I'll quickly give you is the idea of what you might call guna framework. Obviously, we all know about sattvic, rajasic, tamasic trigunas, which are part of our svabhava. And I have seen them in Vivek Chudamani, Devi Bhagavatam, and Bhagavad Gita, and all of them. And obviously, any person will have all the three of them in different ratios. But if we can develop them in certain balance, samatvam yoga uchyate, it is said in Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter. And if we can actually develop it in a dynamic balance, we can develop the Sthita Prajna Lakshanas, which I defined in the context of Western management as a wise leader characteristics. So the equanimity. So I looked for how do I take these three gunas and take it into something else. And I met with Professor V. Krishnamurthy, who is no stranger to Indic Academy. And he had come to United States in 1993 or 94. So we had long conversations, and he suggested I look at how gunas are delineated in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Using that, it took me about 10 years for me to develop a framework with, and also I created an assessment, a qualitative assessment, which we worked with over 10,000 people. And based on that, and what we got out of it, I interviewed like 100 C-suite executives from around the world. That means United States, Europe, and the India. I did some work in Korea and Singapore, but I did not do very much in Australia or Africa using this framework. So we wrote a book called From Smart to Wise with Navi Raju. And in this particular context, I'm not going into deep analysis about it, but what you call essentially the gnanam, karma, karta, buddhi, dhruti, sukham. So gnanam, by the way, I don't translate it as knowledge. I translate it as perspective, because gnanam is not the same as data, information, knowledge, but it is connected with prajna, vijnanam, and some of that. I felt the translation should not be in the same way. So similarly, the gnanam is perspective, and then karma is the action orientation, because some people with a rajasic karma will do something very different, like a very quickly, you can see them when you see at a traffic light. They will accelerate when the yellow light comes because they want to just quickly make it and save that extra 2 minutes. Whereas tamasic person, if you have to turn right or left, they will go into the right lane even a kilometer ahead of time. They will stay in the right lane and say, I don't have anxiety. Now that I'm in the right lane, I will be able to turn when the light turns. So in some respects, the idea of going between the two, I will talk about it in a few minutes if we have time. The third example it comes down to is there is an excellent gentleman in England called Dr. Alan Watkins, who is a physician who actually coaches executives, and not only coaches executives, he coaches sports people like a regatta for the UK and some of the golf players in the performance circuit, very, very high level people he created. And he talked about how the performance actually is connected. Everybody talks about, obviously, if you want to succeed, your behavior has to change. If your behavior has to change, your thinking has to change. We all know that. Nobody needs to tell us. But what he says is, while thinking is something we all know, but we don't recognize how much our physiology, our emotion, and our feelings actually, which are the below the waterline, at as unconscious and subconscious, can impact our thinking. He basically says, to a certain extent, the 5 things which we mentioned, he connects it to Western medicine, but here we can connect it to Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Kosha that are very nicely described in Taittiriya Upanishad. So physiological signals are connected to the body, and Pranamaya Kosha are the emotions. Of course, you may ask, what is the difference between an emotion and a feeling? A cognized emotion is a feeling, whereas energy in motion, which is coming out of large amount of physiological signals, is where the energy gets shifted. And energy, when gets shifted, that leads to certain emotions. But if we name it in a particular way, that becomes feelings. And these 3 will affect our thoughts. And so if we need to think, we need to change feelings, emotions, and physiological signals. Of course, that's what we talk about as the certain ability to deal with various stuff. As you can see, physiological signals are nothing but streams of data. All these streams of data, you can really look at how they affect our emotions. Just as we say, between Annamaya Kosha and Manomaya Kosha, we need to look at the vital energy or prana, and prana is affected by breathing. And here also he talks a lot more about breathing, and he comes to say that you need to really think differently, means you need to change the context in which your thoughts emerge. What is the emotional state in which your thought emerges? If you change your physiology, you can change your thinking, so your action. So he puts it as in a psychological framework. He calls it, saying, if you really look at the activation relaxation, traditionally people looked at performance changes, but he begins to talk about when negative emotion, if we can move into positive emotion, then chances of us becoming successful becomes a lot more. So he says, deal with all this, get into a flow state, and for getting into a flow state, you might have to consciously move to the right, but most of us focus on giving negative feedback to each other. So the negative approach in the traditional clinical psychology, negative approach in the performance management and trying to help other people to find faults is not going to help people to get better. So we need to come up with appreciative inquiry, and we need to focus on where they are very good. And by the way, these are the images that comes in. He says, first control your breath, and then control your emotion. So this is again Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, and Vijnanamaya Kosha connection. And he ends up by giving an acronym. He calls it breathe. Breathe rhythmically, evenly, and through the heart every day is an approach that he says. So in some respects, whether we take the coherence between the brain-heart coherence and trying to work with the heart rate variability and look at, dealing with all of them, or as I called in the gunas, basically I found out when we think well, we are called smart. There are 2 kinds of smartness I defined. One is the functional smart. By the way, that is the Rajasic capability. Tamasic capability. Business smart, I looked at it as a Rajasic capability. And I really looked at various people. I interviewed them. I tried to look at what their capabilities are. And then I took whatever I mentioned to you earlier, Gnanam, Karma, Karta, Buddhi, Druti, Sukham. I translated them as you can see, Karma as action orientation, Kartrutva Bhavam and Bhoktrutva Bhavam as role clarity. And then, of course, role clarity, you have a Tamasic role clarity, Rajasic role clarity, and Sattvic role clarity. Similarly, Buddhi, I called it as a decision logic, and Fortitude, which is a translation of Dhriti, and Sukham, I translated it as a motivation. And with that, we were able to really identify smart people move between functional smartness and business smartness, which is from tamasic to rajasic. But the wise leadership is about between the rajasic and tamasic, how we can get sattvic. That sattvic nature is described in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita as the Sthaprajna Lakshanas. So we called a wise leader is nobody but a Sthaprajna, and this is how we defined it. Defined the wise leader as leveraging smartness for the greater good. Loka Kalyana Praptyartham, not for selfish Mama Dharmartha Kama Pala Purushartham is secondary, because once I do Loka Kalyanam, my individual stuff is also taken care of. How do you do that? Balancing action with reflection and introspection, which are the gateways to humility and ethical clarity. So that's why this has come in. Our book is about 80 years old. Still, it looks like it is being used in several colleges, and we still are invited to give various talks. And people are saying now the wise leadership time has become even much closer. So I won't talk about any of this, but let me stop by saying the wise leader capabilities is one application, writing a book. PhD dissertations in psychology in Saybrook University is another kinds of work. We have used coherence in coaching is another kind of work. And finally, right now, we are working on developing a Hinduism and actually the Indic coaching with Raghu Anantanarayan, Sai Sampath, and some of us, we have created in the Indic Academy something called Center for Consciousness Studies and Inner Transformation. And we are developing two kinds of coaching, essentially Rajarshi and Raja Yogi. So that means Yogi coach is a person who will become like a Raja Guru who can work with them, or a person who actually can do like Janaka, lead with certain yogic leadership that we are looking at. So focusing on Antaranga Yoga. So first we are starting a pilot program in like about 10 days. And if any of you are interested, let us know. But we are going to look at all of us looking at our own inner transformation, going through yoga, going through Bhagavad Gita, going through Upanishads, going through Bharatam. Some of these kinds of things we are using to develop very, very high quality, deep kind of transformation that we can bring in, so that whomever we work with, we can also bring transformation. So that is a overarching framework which we have been using. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity. And I do not know how long I took, but thank you for the time that you have given. And I enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you very much, sir.